This year, we wanted to bring some creative elements to the stage. We know that many of you engage that way. And so in that vein, we invited a wonderful local poet. So this is Chimwemwe Undi. Chim's a local poet. She does both performance and written work. She's been featured in a multitude of publications. She has a master's in linguistics from York University. And from what I've heard, she's gone back to school to do a law degree. Is that right? So the fact that she's here and that her eyes are open and that she doesn't have a bag full of books with her is kind of remarkable. And so I'm so thrilled that she could be here. She's going to be a wonderful addition, so please welcome her to the stage.
Hi. I should say first the reason that I don't have a bag full of books is that I'm a millennial and it's all on my iPad. As a poet and a linguist and a future lawyer, what I am fascinated with is the way that stories shape the way that we understand things. And a story that we were telling ourselves, or a lot of us were telling ourselves, this summer is one that I was interested in interrogating, which has to do with 150 flawless years of Canadianness. And this poem is partially about that. It's called Etamon. The cold is inevitable, sends the pitch flat, but then it mostly already was. Often it's good enough that there are fewer skeeters and ticks and both sides of a good pair of boots. Sometimes there are bugs. Sometimes just some threadbare 90s school sneakers to stare at instead of making eye contact. That's tangential. The better version came to me already maple dipped. It's about building things and naming them after tall men with white hair and sad daughters. Or better, calling them fortresses, which is a good way to suggest there is already a war. Anyway, a century and a half is plenty of time to write a story, to come up with something catchy to sing it to. Look at everything we built, at all the sharp corners on the celebrated shape. The frontier is a figment. The figment's siblings are disfigure and effigy, paradise, feignant, fiction. All I'm saying is calling everything else is a good way to suggest that some things do not matter, is a good way to say who is free to decide what does. The center is the most important thing, which is not to discount the coasts. Think of the dough, another relative, burned so the middle stays white and too soft so the hard brown crust is cut away. I don't bake much, but I write everything down, and here is what they said to. Everything was wonderful. My God. The booze, the snow, the ketchup chips and beavers, shit. Faux fur-lined boots on some good leather mitts, that blue and red and gold, that optimistic green on the commemorative camping chair. Thank you. So I grew up in Southern Africa, in South Africa for part of that. And it wasn't until I moved here at 12 that I began to understand the way that colonialism is mirrored across nations. And I was particularly struck by the connection between the South African story of my people and the stories of indigenous people here on this land. And to acknowledge that this poem is called Zangena. My grandparents' house is too small on too much land that doesn't grow much and bleeds when turned. The corn and kale that struggle from the soil is fine, though it feeds 13 children for twice as many years. There's a truck whose bed we throw mango seeds onto from my grandparents' back porch, exactly where the seeds cannot grow, only dry and rot in the sun. The uncle who can make it go went with his mouth open, teeth gleaming, screaming in a language my teachers wouldn't let me speak. I rebuild my mouth to look like everyone else's, faster and less foreign, standing flat-footed, trying desperately to push against the dirt I was made from. I am black because I come from the earth's inside, and I am trying to relearn the way I draw my breath so I can pretend I am not gasping. My father says, laughing, that Anishinaabe sounds African. Wonders if the hunger growing in Chief Teresa Spence has the same desperate hands that those 300 angry prisoners in 1989 Johannesburg clenched into tired fists, and why should it be different? What is different? There is so much about the news that is too familiar to him and not familiar enough to me. This country yelled frantic for our freedom with its own children squirming underfoot, as though its own Indian Act was no blueprint for apartheid, as though its bloodied hands were not guiding the ones that harmed us. And in homeroom, I ignored these bullshit policies and marble-mouthed apologies, these things I do not know, and I'm never taught to sing of this true north, of strength, of freedom. When my mother stops watching the news, she says it's because it makes her heart hurt and her teeth ache, and nothing about how it is easier to smile around the water cooler and sleep at night, and all of a sudden, we are the silent faces that turned up the Afrikaans radio and ignored the screaming from the streets. Suddenly, we are turning two blind eyes and pretending that they are blue. Suddenly, we are speaking English at the dinner table, and not at all about how much the struggle looks like my uncle's open mouth, all teeth and forbidden. My parents build a house, and it's too big on too little land they never use. They do not plant corn or kale, afraid that anything we bite into will fill our mouths with blood, and not even our own. And there is too much red already in our silent mouths. Thank you.